welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about all the crazy stupid stuff people do in marketing and how you cannot do that by focusing on solid marketing foundations instead. So if you're new to the show, welcome. We're glad to have you. If you're not new to the show, welcome. We're glad to have you back. And if you are here, we would love for you to let us know. There's this fancy little mechanism on the side of your screen called the chat. And we would love to hear your voice as part of the conversation today. But what conversation are we having, you might ask? Well, if you looked at the title of the show, you would know that we're talking about values in marketing. And I don't know why I even pretend I'm not going to say I'm super excited about this, because I'm super excited about this conversation for two specific reasons. One, because I think values is a hugely important foundational marketing piece that we really need to be cognizant of. And maybe we're not prioritizing it as much as we could in our conversations. But secondly, because we've actually talked about values in marketing on the show. You go, what, Tracy, you're doing a repeat episode? No. One, I have a different lovely guest who is going to provide new insight to values, which are going to be different and interesting for you to try on. But also because one of the biggest premises of this show is that these types of conversations, these foundational marketing things, are not just a one-off conversation that you have one time and then things just happen. It doesn't happen that way. And so we're bringing values back into the conversation because we should not forget about values. They should be a continual part of the conversation. And as such, they are a continual part of the conversation on the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show. Hello, Ben Baker, joining us from the crowd. Always great to see you, my friend, and fellow guest on the show quite often, and who actually introduced me to today's guest, which is, this is what networks do for you people. They fill your podcast episodes, not just that, other great things. But I have Alan here with me today to have this new evolving conversation of values in marketing. So Alan, before we jump into the topic, would you like to let us know a little bit about you and why values are so important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy, and brilliant to be here. And like you say, thanks to Ben for the introduction. And as you say, networks, that's what it's all about, right? And people sharing good things for you with others. And that's kind of a bit behind what we're talking about today. So I started my working life in commercial hospitality management. So I ended up running 5-star hotels and conference centers. And without knowing it, I think it taught me everything you need to know about being really clear about a brand, then representing that brand authentically through the people that represent you, and delivering an on-brand customer experience. And for those things to be aligned at a strategic level and coordinated in execution. And that's it. It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that. And usually it's the simplest things that don't end up coming to fruition. So then, yeah, I think we're all in agreement. Networks work. I mean, when you work them. But that's a conversation for a different show. Or maybe it'll come up today. Who knows? This is the nice thing about this show. Alan, in your introduction, you said the word brand a whole bunch of times. So let's, for our audience today, because there's lots of different definitions of these types of terms. So let's start with the definition of, when you say brand, what do you mean?
Yeah. So let me first start by telling you what I don't mean.
Okay.
So sometimes people think brand equals logo, and it's like, oh, come on. And so I'm at the other end of the scale. And for me, in simple terms, brand is simply having crystal clarity about what you stand for as an organization. What is your personality? And that's where the purpose and the values of the organization sit. And then, of course, what surrounds that is your visual identity and all of that stuff. But it starts with crystal clarity about what you stand for as a business.
Okay, so then share with us, what do values have to do with the stand we take for our business?
Okay, well, if you don't know what your values are, or if you haven't articulated them, how can you be clear about what you stand for? So I mentioned hospitality, and I like to talk in practical terms because I think it makes it easier to understand rather than talking about stuff that's in a theoretical book. So when I was at my last hospitality property, it was based 20 miles outside of London in the UK. We were in the residential conference market. Our property was a 5-star property in a 200-acre estate with a championship golf course, beauty spa, outdoor gardens, all of that sort of stuff. And we were competing with London properties for our business. So from a brand perspective, we positioned ourselves as London's favorite hotel and country club, so that we were directly competing with London properties, but reinforcing the position that we had a much better environment than the London properties, and our rates actually were less than theirs. So that's the first point. But can I go on to explain how that then needs to be put into action? So let's take employee engagement. Just like most businesses or many businesses, we did have a recognition program for our employees. But what we didn't call it was Employee of the Month or Most Valuable Player or Star of the Month. What we did call it was the Golden Apple Awards, in honor of the orchards that were in the grounds of the 200-acre estate, in order to reinforce to our employees the positioning of London's favorite hotel and country club, right? So we could have just called it Employee of the Month, but we got far more value out of it by being aligned with what the brand stood for. And then if I move on to the customer experience, so the third of those 3 elements that I mentioned earlier, we did some work on the customer journey, and like a lot of 5-star hotels, our greeting was very, very good. But we figured that the departure was perhaps not the best experience, because that's when you have to pay, right? And if it's an expensive property, it's not such a good thing. So what we didn't do was give a bottle of wine on departure or a discount voucher for your next stay. What we did hand over with the bill was a small sachet of poppy seeds taken from the gardens, with a message from Tom, the head gardener, just simply saying for you to remember your stay with us. And the feedback we got from guests was just phenomenal. And, you know, you can guess how much a sachet of poppy seeds costs, right? Virtually nothing. But again, the point was that we're reinforcing the brand positioning. So that's how the whole thing works.
So let's dive into this a little bit. Let's use the puppies as an example, because so in terms of the brand position, I get that, but how would you roll that back to the values of the business? Like, what would you say the poppy seeds say about the value of that property?
Yeah. So in that particular business, we were not values led at that time. And I guess this was because this preceded my interest in values. So we were probably doing this
pre-poppy seeded.
Yeah, pre-poppy seeded. We were probably doing this intuitively rather than consciously by using the values. But what we did have in place was extreme attention to thinking for our guests and doing things for them without perhaps them even realizing that they would find that a good thing to receive. So it was this thing around human care, you know, and a personal touch. And so if we had articulated that through our values, it might well have been in our value set. And then probably the idea would have come out more easily, because we would have been saying, okay, so what can we do in the customer journey on departure to display this personal attention and care for our guests? And it might well have come up. So values is a way that you can actually guide your thinking and creativity in order to do something that feels relevant and relatable to the employee or the guest, as opposed to it kind of being done for the sake of it, if you like. So imagine if we were visiting 2 head offices, and one was a trendy tech company and the other was a very traditional, well-established law firm, let's say. Now, when we arrive at the traditional law firm, I don't think we would feel very comfortable if we saw people wearing jeans and t-shirts. right? Because for the tech company, that's absolutely fine, and we would make that connection. But with the traditional law firm, we're expecting a suit, we're expecting really well-groomed people, maybe wooden, oak, furniture, smell of polish in the air, that sort of thing. So again, all it's doing is taking the brand and the values as a guide in order to create the experience.
Hmm. Well, and I think too, it's really interesting because it's actually making me think about lived values versus like published values. And it's interesting because I think everybody uses different words for different things, right? And when I think about the poppy seed example, to me, there's like a beingness of country club, right? Like we are deciding to own the fact that we're not in the city, that we're a country club. And because we're a country club, we have all of these things. And so we're going to share these things with the employees, with the consumers. And it's actually an interesting example because even if you're not being intentionally values driven, when you're actually living the values that way, and everybody, even if it's kind of a undocumented acceptance of that, like we're all here to create this kind of experience for people, this is our country club experience and this is what we're going to create, then that happens through lived values. And it's nice to have those as documented values because then you can create intention behind those things. But it's also possible to live your values without necessarily saying I have this like written on my wall somewhere.
Totally agree, Tracy. And some of the places that you visit that have the most deeply embedded values don't even have it written down.
But because like, they know it, you can like
exactly
feel it.
Like you say, that doesn't mean to say it's not there. Having said that, on the other side of that coin, there is something for me around how we are all naturally very busy, and it's kind of easy to slip into autopilot and not do things as consciously as you probably should. And being conscious about it helps you to do that. So I remember having a conversation with, let's say, a very famous tennis club in England, where there's a tournament every year. And
we won't name names though.
Yeah, they're a brilliant example of values being truly embedded. I remember the first time I went to that place and I was hugely impressed. And then I took my son there for his first visit some 25 years later, and it felt kind of the same, a bit more modernized, but kind of the same for me. And yet they didn't have it articulated so clearly. And I had a really interesting discussion with the team about how, whilst they didn't have it articulated, it didn't mean to say that they might not be able to squeeze a little bit more if they did have it articulated to cover those moments when maybe you slip into autopilot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I totally agree with that. And I think a lot of times, especially at this point in like business building, there's so many resources. There's books about everything. There's podcasts about everything, right? There's a lot of ways to get information. And so a lot of times these like things kind of just trickle into your business procedures, right? And you don't ask, you're not using your values as like a filter for those types of things to go through. They just happen. And I would also say though, because I'm on like the flip side of the coin. Before I go there, I want to appreciate that Ben is sharing about how traditions and legacy are deeply felt. I think that feeling component is something that is really valuable from a lived values perspective. People, you would like tell who's your people and who's not your people, right? And when you are using that beingness as a measure, then like you feel things. And it may or may not be like very scientific, but it's definitely very tangible.
Definitely. And I'd just like to add one thing, because Ben, I think you're absolutely right that tradition and legacy is so important. But for me, there's actually an extra bit there, that if you can retain your rootedness there, but still be able to move with the times, and achieve both, as opposed to remaining, a decade ago. That's the real key. That balance of being able to achieve both at the same time is very rare.
And I think that I would say that's an intention thing. Would you say, Alan? Like you have the intention of retaining that legacy and that feeling, but also you want to keep your business relevant. So
definitely
it evolves. Everything evolves. Otherwise, we're Blockbuster.
So it's basically using that history and tradition as a strength, but not as handcuffs.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it, like guidelines, right? Creating it as guidelines. And maybe in the new world, there's a different way we can create this feeling, or additional way that we can create this feeling that we didn't have access to before, but now we do have. And Ben is right along with us. True brands are living, breathing things that need to evolve. Otherwise,
Tracy, the other thing that you mentioned about how these things can kind of slot into your business procedures and all that sort of stuff, that's really important to me, that you actually practice people behaving and making choices and decisions every single day based on the values, rather than the values being in a presentation that you look at every now and again, and that's it. So there's a story, I haven't found out whether this is one of those urban myths or if it was a true story, but the story goes that it was a business in the northeast of England, and one of the company values was trust. And it was the board meeting to approve the capital expenditure for the coming year. And on the list, there was a clocking in and clocking out technology thing. So you knew who was there, when they were there, and all of that stuff, with £1 million against it. And one of the directors said, hang on, guys, how is this in keeping with our value of trust? And, he's dead right, And they, as a result of that question, they made a choice not to spend the money on that, and they spent it on something else. But if he hadn't forced the question to be answered, maybe they would have ended up doing that. And who knows how much harm they would have done to their brand by putting in place a practice that was completely against one of their core values.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I would love to imagine that much due diligence is being done on a board level or an executive level on the day-to-day. I don't know that that my experience speaks to that. Because I would say, back to my flip side of the coin, is that what I have experienced more often than not is like published values, but then a disconnect between what the lived values actually are and the documented values. And similar how we started this conversation with a definition of like, what does brand mean? Because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I don't think we do a very good job at like getting a co-understanding of what a value might mean, because what cares about people means to me might manifest very differently than what cares about people does for you. But if we're both responsible, like, especially in client facing scenarios, right? Salespeople, customer experience, like in housekeeping, delivery, right? Like there's a lot of different places where people forget that these are customer facing interactions. And how are we checking? What is our filter to see, like, are these people living this, and do they even understand what we mean when we say that?
Yeah, and I'll explain this exercise, which people, if they're watching this or listening to this, you'll be able to do this. So imagine that you've got a bunch of people with you, and what you do is you ask them to close their eyes, and you can have a bit of fun by saying, did you hear the S on eyes? That means you need to shut both of them. And can you point to the ceiling with your right arm? And keeping your eyes closed and still pointing to the ceiling with your right arm, but not moving, imagine where the direction north is. And then you give them a few seconds to really decide where they think it is. And then with that right arm that's pointing to the ceiling, their eyes still closed, ask them to point in that direction north. You then ask them to open their eyes and take a look around, and usually everybody's kind of covered all 4 points of the compass. So then you have some more fun explaining that, your boss told me you're all such bright people. So what went so badly wrong there? Now, and then you can reveal that nobody told them where the direction north was.
Right.
So it's totally unreasonable to expect anybody to have a clue where it is. And exactly, this is reinforcing what you said about values. If you just slap 5 words up on the wall and say, can you go and live our values? Don't be surprised if you have your behavior pointing all directions like that. So values as labels, I think, are totally overestimated. And what is critical is that you're very clear and concise about what you mean by that. And then what comes afterwards is the lived experience and learning as you live, rather than thinking that there is this one definition that is always true, because it never will be.
Oh, I love this concept of learning as you live. Because I think I've heard learning as you go and like these types of things, but it's interesting to think about it from a values perspective, because if we are living our values, right, if we're showing up and doing that, and I don't know, just like I don't believe in 100% authenticity, I don't think that anybody is living their values 100% all of the time, especially intentionally, right? Like we just have other things that will be on our mind from time to time. But when we are predominantly living our values, that's a really different learning trajectory, right? We're learning as we go, but we're actually learning then in the direction of our values, which from an authenticity perspective is super exciting for me, because one of the things I experience quite often, especially on like an individual contributor perspective, is that I'm being told I need to learn how to negotiate. So I go and I learn how to negotiate. But like, one, you didn't decide that, right? You weren't like, I want to learn how to negotiate. Someone told me I'm supposed to. So it's like external to me. And then 2, I don't even really have like a desired destination, right? Like, is that in learning in conjunction with the values? And then I feel like we can use values very loosely in terms of like, well, we have a value of being eager to learn. Okay, but except now you're judging me against my eagerness to learn what you told me I have to learn, versus like my eagerness to learn about people, which is my innate default joy of learning. And then now we just have like convoluted stuff that was supposed to sound confusing. If it sounded confusing to everyone, it was supposed to sound confusing, because the point is we got to this point where everything is so convoluted, and then you don't even know what's a value anymore. And you're like, well, I guess I'll just do my work.
Well, and I don't want to confuse it more, but something else that sometimes happens is that people talk and think about these values in isolation, as opposed to in the set, or say you've got 5 values, they interact with each other. So, I liken it to like a deck of cards. You would never play with just the club suite or just the diamond suite. You have to play with them all together. And so there will be tension sometimes between these values. And I remember being on a podcast and the guy saying to me, do they ever compete with each other? And I just made up this story about, imagine a guy with a partner and they've got a newborn child, and the guy is out of work and can't put food on the table for his family. Family is one of his core values, and so is peace. He is a pacifist. And he gets offered a job. Hooray! It's in an ammunition factory. Oh no. So what does he do? And it might be that he decides that in order to put food on the table at home, he will take that job. And for every hour that he's not working, he will be scrabbling to find a job to work somewhere else because he hates working there. But going through that thought process, using your values as your guide, helps you to make a decision that you can feel comfortable with.
This, in all the conversations I've had about values, I've never actually thought about like their interrelatedness between each other. And So like, we'll use these two because these were two documented values from my past: eager to learn and cares about people. For me as a human, those two things are intricately connected, right? I learn about people and it allows me to care about people. This is like part of my process. And it's like the thing I love to learn the most. I love to learn about people. I'm curious about people by nature. And so one of the things that like worked really well for me is like I always built really great relationships with clients because I'm curious about people and I'm allowed to be curious about them because I'm supposed to upsell them, right? So then it works out. It works out for both people. People get better solutions. I get to meet my values as a human. But something that was always like, that was like my natural manifestation of the values. And then I always felt like I was getting pulled away from my natural manifestation of that, right? Like that wasn't deemed learning. And so if I was going to be a good quote unquote team member and I needed to demonstrate an eagerness to learn, then I had to want to learn everything my boss wanted me to know, which was how to use Adobe Creative Suite and how to negotiate her way and like all of these things. And then all of a sudden, my experience of that, it breaks my experience of cares about people. Yeah. Because now you aren't demonstrating that you care enough about me, but that's also based on my definition of my eagerness to learn and being about people. That's not necessarily your eagerness to learn. And so it's really interesting to see how those, even like people who are not aligned in terms of what it looks like to live the values, you can be like living the values, but in your own interpretation, and that can create conflict.
Yeah, definitely.
In a brand, yeah.
There's another example of imagine an organization where honesty is one of the core values. And imagine that you're in this organization, you believe in that value deeply, and you're a salesperson. And the head of sales comes to you and says, Tracy, can you sell some more stuff to client XYZ this month, please? Because we're a little bit short of our target and the team want to get their bonus. And you're like, well, I sold them a bunch of stuff last week, so they don't really need any more for now. And your boss says, yeah, but are you listening to me? We're a bit short of our target. And you've got a great relationship with those people. And I'm sure that you'll be able to sell them more stuff. And then we'll make our target and we'll all get our bonus. And so you might not consciously go through this process, but even if you did, you might say, okay, I understand the reasoning behind this. I don't quite agree with it and it makes me feel rather uncomfortable, but I will do it because I'm being asked to by my boss. I'll be looking after my colleagues. And so, yes, I'll do it. And then imagine that that gets repeated and repeated more and more often. And you can get to a situation where you're not living in line with your values, that in that first example, you're just feeling uncomfortable and living with it. But if it goes on, you can actually become very ill as a result. And so it's really dangerous ground. But again, the benefit is going through the conscious thought process so that you can arrive at a decision. And in that example, you might say, okay, I'm going to do it the once. You might even say, right, I've had enough now, but I'm not so stupid that I'm going to walk out of this job. I'm going to spend 6 months finding another job, and I'm going to do it in a calculated manner. That doesn't mean to say that you're compromising your values. It just means that you've used your values to arrive at a decision that you think is right for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one, the choice of honesty as value is an interesting one, because I feel like it falls into the category of shoulds, right? That should be a value of ours. We should value honesty, which is not helpful from a values perspective, because now you're just trying to be something that you're not. But it's also interesting to look at, like, I mean, sure, we're here to talk about values in marketing. And a lot of times people look at that from an external marketing perspective, like how they see that in the market on TV or on a digital ad or a LinkedIn profile or something like that. But this starts with the people at the business, right? So now you're the marketing coordinator and you're being asked to do something that you don't think is in alignment with the corporate values. And maybe you're new in the role. Maybe you have like searched and searched and searched to try and get out of a really terrible search situation. Now you're not selling ammunitions anymore, but you're being asked, if we have like, we may not be thinking about this way, but you're being asked to like trade your values on a daily basis, right? Someone's telling me that I need to, I'll tell you, I'll use an example specifically from my career, is that I worked for a direct mail organization, and one of the biggest clients was a casino. Now, I don't have a problem with people gambling, but I do have a problem with advertising gambling because I feel like it's addictive. And that's my own perspective, right? Have your own perspective, totally free, but I can't do it. I can't create a direct mail campaign for a casino. And when I joined the organization, I said that, right? Like, I appreciate that this is the biggest client. And one of the things I would commit to is going out and finding a bunch of other clients, so we are diversified in our client portfolio. But I cannot manage this account. I won't do it justice because I don't believe in doing it. And so I don't believe it shouldn't be done. I just believe I shouldn't do it. And I was really lucky in that scenario because my team, and at that time, I wouldn't say that we had like very well-defined values from a business perspective, but we did have an underlying value of like, how can we do the best for a client, right? So there's another campaign manager. He got the account, right? Which he was super happy about because it was a big account. And everybody wins, right? So there's that honesty can lead to good things. But if you're so afraid to, honesty is a good example, I feel like, because if you're new or you're too nervous or you're not used to speaking up or you have other corporate trauma that's like keeping you stuck in a place, then you might not stand up for your own values. And then eventually these are the things that people leave jobs for, because you're like, you're asking me to trade away who I am every single day. But if we also don't have enough confidence to stand up and be like, hey, this is what I'm hearing you ask me to do. I just want to clarify that what you're asking me to do is go against my value of honesty, even though it's supposed to be a shared value for this organization. Is that what you're asking me to do? Because they might not even realize that's what they're asking you to do.
I love your example, Tracy, because that is values in pragmatic action, right? Rather than being this kind of conceptual thing that you're happy to have on slides and all the rest of it and talk about, but don't actually touch the business. And I think there's a real challenge in organizations, actually, because historically the whole work of values has either lived in marketing / public relations / communications or human resources. Right. And neither of those functions are actually the guts of the business. They're support functions. And so I believe for us to move forward another step, I think we've done brilliant work over the last 10 years in terms of people at last realizing the importance and value of values, but there's not enough people with operational experience of that day-to-day decision-making stuff and dealing with them very pragmatically, as opposed to the more kind of squeaky clean environment in marketing, PR, comms, and HR. So that will be a good step forward, to have more operators operating in this space.
Yeah, well, and this is, I mean, I feel like the more we discuss all of these types of things, which I feel are like foundational marketing principles, the whole foundational component of this is that it's a foundational business principle, right? It manifests in marketing. It might manifest in an onboarding training that is hosted by HR, but it also manifests in the day-to-day operations, in the day-to-day delivery, in the day-to-day way people talk to their managers, right? Like, I wrote this down, the guts of the business, right? Like, it exists in the guts of the business. And one of the things I found really interesting, because I'm not going to pretend that I haven't been asked from a marketing perspective to like sell these values to the world that I do not believe are lived values within an organization, which makes my job very difficult as a marketer, because I actually believe in these values, but I don't want to use them from a marketing perspective to bring you into something that is going to not be aligned with your values. That feels really bad. So have you also seen any like complexities like that, Alan, when it goes like external facing, when we don't have this clarity of being?
There's a huge temptation. I remember being with a client, and the client said, right, so now what we're going to do is, what I want my leadership team to articulate is our proposition to external stakeholders and our proposition to internal stakeholders. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Why do you need them to be different? And eventually there was a realization that to be truly authentic, you have to be consistent. And the way you deal with all of your stakeholders needs to be very, very close. Yes, there might be 15 or 20% variation for various reasons, but the core of it needs to be consistent. So to play this game where you're treating one bunch of stakeholders like this and another bunch of stakeholders like that is no longer sustainable in this world where we're all so joined up. And to your point about marketing, I've used this phrase before, and I asked a marketer, would you rather be known as an expert in persuasion or an expert in authenticity? And I think that's the key question for marketers. What do you really want to be? And in the environment that we're living in at the moment, where people are making choices based on what's important to them, on their values, rather than a more rational basis that it used to be. And in a world where we're so connected now through social media and the internet, and in a world where instead of the brand being owned by the organization, it is now co-owned by all of the different stakeholder groups, you can't afford to do anything different than be masters of authenticity.
Although we make it sound pretty easy to be a master of authenticity, but alas, there are very many layers of things that we've been convinced to do from a business perspective that have absolutely nothing to do with our authenticity. And also, like, Alan, because you've worked in some big organizations, I know one of the things I've seen is when you're talking to like solopreneurs, it seems a little bit easier for them to connect with this idea of authenticity because it's just me, right? But now once you're an organization, authenticity is not just you. Authenticity is us. So what is us? Do we have an us story? Do we have do we feel like a team? And the thing that I always find really interesting, I've had some work scenarios where like I've had very good authority over my team, but the teams don't really work well together. Right? And like specifically when this is a sales and marketing team, like this doesn't work, right? But you have that authority, so you create this kind of beingness or culture for your department, but then it's not the same as another one, which like to some degree we have to expect because there's what these people are in this department, these people are in this department. So the manifestation of the brand or the values might look different, but then how do we bridge that gap from an overarching brand perspective to create that usness?
Yeah. So first, I think you're absolutely spot on. And this is what I referred to at the beginning when I talked about hospitality, where what you learn basically is that the managing director or the general manager of that property has responsibility for the whole business. And it's the whole business performance that counts, not one bit of it or another bit of it. And when I left that sector, I was really quite shocked because what I then saw was all of these silos with their leaders trying to do their very best for their silo, but a kind of almost absence of any general management overseeing the whole thing. And you talk about sales and marketing in particular. Here's what I love this example. So I was working for an automotive firm, and their marketing strapline was inspired performance. So very good. Then I sat in on some sales training, and the trainer kept on using the phrase service excellence all the way through. So at the break, I said to him, I'm really curious about the terminology, and you use service excellence. I'm wondering, have you ever considered using inspired service? And he looked at me quizzically and said, why would we do that? So I said, well, it's just that your marketing guys use inspired performance. So I was thinking, alignment there. And he actually put his hand on my forearm and he said, but Alan, that's marketing. This is sales.
Like Russell says here, sales and marketing always seems to have a healthy gap.
Yeah, too right, Russell.
And is it healthy? No,
Well,
it's not actually healthy. It's big, but it's not healthy for the organization.
Yeah, it's healthily big.
Right. Well, and this is also where, though, I feel like there's an opportunity to bridge these types of gaps through actual lived values, right? Because if we were going to say, if we could get back to our raison d'etre, right? Like our reason of being from an organization perspective, and the marketing team can understand their role in that, and we can both understand and appreciate sales role in that, because we don't want to do that, right? But we want to serve the grand purpose, and this is how we can serve the grand purpose. I've always come back to that example about NASA sending a man to the moon, right? And the guy, the janitor, what are you doing here? Send a man to the moon, right? This is what we're doing here. When we have that level of dedication to the same goal, I also think it allows us to create that space to allow the values to be individually interpreted, because we do have that clear purpose of why we are on this journey together.
Yeah, but for me, it's about leaders taking the responsibility for their role in designing that environment. Because how many times do you hear leaders talking about culture as though it was this thing that kind of grew on its own without any help? I think it's very much like a garden. If you have a clear idea of how you want the garden to be, and then you shape it and you continually look after it, and it will flourish. But if you don't pay attention to it every kind of very regularly, let's say, then it can easily turn into mayhem. And that's what happens all too often in organizations. It's actually what led me, I created an approach called the 31 practices, which is about daily conscious practice of a simple, observable behavior, which is expressly linked to one of the core values of the organization. So the neuroscience of this is that through repeated conscious practice, it becomes the way things are. And it also legitimizes the conversation around, well, hold on a minute, Tracy, you know that practice number 16 is about meticulous attention to cleanliness. So why is your desk such a mess? And that helps you to achieve that value of excellence, let's say, that practice is linked to. And once it becomes the conversation in the guts of the business, that's when you stand a chance for it to be alive and kicking.
Yeah, it's just like, I think we would all like to describe our business as alive and kicking, right? I don't think so much, and I see this specifically in marketing too, things end up being like so boxed in, right? We have our defined brand guidelines, and this is the way we can talk, and these are the places we can show up, and all of these handcuffs, really. And we forget to just go back to, like, what does it look like to hold each other accountable from a values perspective in our day-to-day, and then look at how that manifests, instead of having these like hard, like social media limitations are very common as well, right? Like, I remember a friend telling me I think it was might have been their marketing team or their HR department, one of the two, but they were posting these posts on social media, and the employees were supposed to like them and share them, but they were not supposed to do that during their workday because they're not allowed to use social media at work. And I was like, what values is this even speaking to at all? It's definitely not speaking to trust, right? Because I don't know if that's a defined one, but like, what is up with that? It's so confusing. But so we try to like we police the brand from the outside. And so much so, like I've had clients where content will never get posted because there's such like stringent handcuffs on what can go out to the world that now we're not even creating any kind of brand experience at all because nothing is happening. Yeah. But like, what if we flip that and we stop thinking about controlling what goes out and we start look at empowering the values we want to see thrive in the organization on a day-to-day basis within the operations of the business, well, then maybe I don't have to police my people so hard.
And you know, the difference can be remarkable. So I was working with a hotel company and we put the 31 practices in place. And within 3 months, their guest satisfaction score had jumped by 12.5%. And in a board meeting, my client, she said, you know, the question was, how have we done so well? And she said, well, can anybody think of anything that we've done different except for introducing the 31 practices? And nobody could answer her. So she said, well, that must be it.
I mean, this is the benefit of changing one thing at a time, because then we can see the value of that activity. Not always possible to only change one thing at a time, but this is the thing that, this is why this show exists, folks, to demonstrate the value that the foundational practices, while we might think from a marketing perspective, those foundational practices are internal and they don't impact our external marketing, they do. And not just our marketing, right? If you think about marketing from a distribution perspective, but like how your people show up at office, how that aligns with sales or client success or upselling or like all delivery operations, how we design products to service our clients' needs, right? Like all of this is connected. Well, it has, I think for a lot of organizations, it's not connected, but it has the possibility of being connected. And when we're all we are all, the word I'm just thinking is foundationalized, but that I don't think that's a word. But we're all foundationalized in the same thing. And we're out there doing our part, living our version of that on a day-to-day basis, then that is what manifests in business results, in client relationships, in like brand experience, brand awareness, right? Like that's what the world sees of us. And isn't that what we want the world to see of us?
That's exactly right. And I'm totally biased here because I'm still an operator at heart. But if you think about creating your official corporate marketing messages, people don't believe them anymore anyway. So, you know, what they believe is their felt experience and the felt experience of people that they meet. So, you know, even employees are the same. If you meet somebody in a bar and you say, oh, where do you work? And they say company XYZ, you say to them, okay, so how is it to work there then? They don't bring up the website on their phone and tell you the official messaging.
Oh, look at all the features of our product.
Yeah, that's right. And even if they did, you wouldn't believe them. You'd say, oh, come on, tell me the truth. And then what do they tell you believe?
Yeah. Well, and because also in that like sharing, there's the energy transfer that happens, right? So when I'm telling you something that I believe to be true, you can tell that. Versus when I tell you, I help people, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, one, why do I care? One, two, why would I believe you? Right? Like, there's no meaningful exchange of emotion in that scenario. And this is why I do love coming at these conversations from a marketing perspective, because I think from an emotional connection perspective, we get permission. We get permission to do those things. So the marketing's job is to create connections with people. Okay, great. use emotions and create connections with people. Now we can use emotions in a manipulative or persuasive way, or we can use emotions in a authentic connection kind of way. But even in that, like I wrote down the question, would you rather be an expert in persuasion or an expert in authenticity? I would hope that most of you who know me know what I would choose. Yeah. If you don't, please let's schedule a conversation so you can get to know me better. But like, I'm not here to convince you of anything, right? But I am here to share stuff with you, right? Like, I believe sharing is caring, and that we can help each other and we can exchange value, and that we can do all of these things. I'm not going to persuade you for anything. It's just you choose, right? But there's, again, like for me, I'm a personal brand. I've done a lot of work to get very clear on, like, I know that would be a hard no for me. And if someone came with a new book that was #1 on Amazon or whatever everybody says they are nowadays, then like on the art of persuasion and how this is the only way to build your business, right? Like there will be people who are like, oh no, I need to learn this way because this is the only way to. Whereas when you are coming at the world with this knowingness of who you are, whether as an individual brand or as a brand, you have the opportunity to be like, no, that is not for us. That you want to try and go sell that to other people, that's fine, right? Do you, but that's not for us. That's not what we would do. And once you have that power like that, I always think that's like the golden pinnacle of success in branding, is to be able to know, like, no, we wouldn't do that. And just because another company would do it and stoop to those levels, I'm not going to chase that. Because if people are attracted to that, I don't want the people who are attracted to that. I want the people who are attracted to this.
That's the ultimate for me, is that and it's such a fantastic opportunity for marketing as a profession, because marketing should be the beginning of, and it should touch every part of the business all the way through. And so I remember I was involved in the real estate function for a big bank, and we were putting up a new building in the City of London. And so I suggested that we go and ask marketing what they would like to see in this new building. Yeah. And do you know what they said? They said, can you go and speak to the agency? That's why we hire them. And they weren't interested.
I need to do a show about agencies. Just a different episode. I have all of the thoughts on that. Mostly because I believe a brand is an experience that someone has of an organization, right? And I use my relationship with Disney quite often, because I went to Disneyland for the first time when I was 8 years old, and like I went there and magic was created. And so now this is, and like so many times over and over, right? And like the people there actually expected as part of their job description to create magic for people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how are you going to create magic for people today? What if we were having that kind of conversation from Russell is sharing he works for a tech company, right? Like, what if we were doing that from a tech perspective? But also, what if we went like one level deeper? And so Russell's saying people don't really want technology. They want convenience in his example, right?
Yeah.
But like I had a conversation with a friend yesterday who has a new like chatbot on his website, and he's always trying to like have an authentic brand experience. So he is like, I need my brand person to come and look at this. And so I was like, the reason I love it is because the technology has been implemented to generate a brand experience of you that you would give people, right? And so yeah, your human brain can't source all of the 500 plus articles you've written in your life, but a bot can. But then it's your thoughts, right? And like, anyway, I was like, that sometimes people want convenience. Sometimes people want authenticity. And if you have that clarity, then you can also say like, okay, well, I want a tech partnership or a tech stack that allows me to generate that. I actually don't care that much about convenience. I care about generating more authenticity. And every buyer has their own version of that. But the version creates what Ben is sharing here is the tribes, right? When we have a joint version of what that value is, then we attract our people and it repel other people, which is fine because I don't know about anybody watching this show today, but I personally cannot service 8 billion people on the face of the planet, right? Look, I don't think any of us can. I mean, the Pepsis and Coca-Colas and Apples and IBMs and Microsofts of the world don't even serve this 100% of humans, right? This is not the point. We have an opportunity to find our people, but we only have an opportunity to find our people if we live our values. If we're showing up with something else driving the boat, then we're probably going to hit a bunch of choppy waters.
If not some rocks.
I was going to say, I'm not a sailor, so I'm not even sure where that analogy came from, but it seems like it made sense.
Tracy, it's one that I use actually, because I tell people that you've got a choice, right? In life, either you can be like the boat being tossed around by the waves and just do your best, or else you can use your values to decide where you want to go and navigate your way through those waves. So it's your choice.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in this like survival mode where we're just trying to keep our boat afloat, right? And just got to keep the boat afloat. I don't even want to think about my values, right? I got to worry about when my next sale and it needs to be tomorrow, right? Yeah. And I believe it's short-sighted to forget that if we maybe just even took 5 minutes and stepped back and said like, okay, well, I've been doing all these things. All these things have not been manifesting what I'm hoping that they will, right? Like, what if I took 5 minutes to ask myself, how am I living my values? Or how am I living the corporate values and doing those things? Or am I just doing those things? And is there a different level of energy, a different level of intention that I could bring to that would make all of the difference?
I'm completely biased, obviously, but I think the difference you're describing is between I don't hope the language is okay here, but we have a phrase here which is happy as a pig in shit. And it's like that's one way you can be, or like you say, you can take a bit of time to have greater clarity about what's important to you and pursue those things and get things out of the way in your life that go against those things. Right. And then over time, as you get used to it, it actually becomes far easier.
Yeah. Well, and even in that, right? Like, it's interesting if you're trying to attract, one of the like quotes Ben is sharing here from Seth Godin is, people like us do things like that, right? Like, what if you're trying to attract like-minded people to do a thing that you're not doing? I want you to like stop and think about your values and how they come to life in marketing. But I'm not going to do that as like the service provider. Probably should drink my own Kool-Aid is a saying we have here. And if we do that, how does the external world perceive us differently? As if, hey, there's my people. I want to go do that thing with those people. Great.
Have you got time for one final story?
We do. Yes. One final story.
So I was pitching for a piece of work, and there was a procurement guy in the room, and I did the presentation, and the guy said, so what are the metrics going to be? What are you going to improve? So I explained that generally customer experience goes up, employee engagement goes up, and employee retention goes up, but that it varies from organization to organization. And he said, well, if you can't tell me the metrics, we cannot award you the contract. So before my brain could register, I heard myself say to him, well, if you're not ready, then let's not do it. And his chin just about hit the desk. And as I was I didn't get the business. As I was leaving the room, one voice in my head was saying, you idiot, you just lost a sale, you could have won. And the other voice was saying, yeah, but did you see his face when you said that?
And I mean, it's a good test for like who's your people and who's not your people. Yeah. I mean, my immediate response to that would be like, well, if you actually have anybody comes in here and promises that they can hit a specific number, then they're probably out to lunch. So if that's why you're going to choose them, then I'm not interested. Because like, I was at this gala event for like our local chamber. And I brought with me the executive director of a nonprofit board that I sit on. And he told me about this after the fact. He was like, yeah, this like venture capital guy came like up to me and was like, give me your 5-minute pitch, or no, 30-second pitch. I don't know, whatever he said. And I was like, and he was telling me about how he's always stressed out about that. And I need to figure out an answer for this and blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? If someone like approached me and said that, I'd be like, no, thank you. Take your 30 seconds and give it to someone else, because that's not the type of relationships I'm interested in building. If you want to have an actual conversation, like happy to have that. But I'm not here to pitch you. This is a gala Chamber of Commerce event. Like, are you nuts? And he was like, you would have said that? And I was like, yes, because I know that I don't believe in that. And I can stand up for that. And then if he's never going to give me money, one, I'm not trying to get any money from him anyway. So if that's all he's looking for, that's not me. And I just saved everybody time. Also, I'm probably a bunch more memorable to him because I'm not just another one of many that gave him a 30-second pitch once he demanded it, right? Like, no, that's not how I build relationships. If that's how someone else wants to go build relationships, go do you. But like, you're not my people. And I don't need to waste time with not my people. And he was like, oh, you need to teach me how to do that. And I was like, okay, this is a practice. You like build confidence in ourselves as we practice standing up for ourselves. But just like you said at the beginning, Alan, like if we're looking at values and we're looking at brand, this is about what are you going to stand for? And what are you going to not stand for? And actually stand for it. Oh, okay. Just like every guest I have on this show, we could keep talking about this for hours and hours and hours. Although at some point people are going to stop listening on LinkedIn Live, and I think it cuts me off after like going over 15 minutes. But Alan, if people are interested in learning more about you and the work that you do with values and service brands, where is the best place for them to find you?
Probably two places. So servicebrandglobal.com is the website, and I'm on LinkedIn. So Alan Williams, and Service Brand usually finds me.
It does. And if you want to make it really easy on yourself, you can just click on his name in this post because he's tagged, and you can go there and connect and tell him you saw him on the show, and then he'll have a little bit of background on what you might know about him instead of being a random stranger. Because we don't believe in random strangers. We believe in making connections and connecting on values, because that's what creates very good foundational processes for life, not just marketing. Thank you. I want to say thank you to Ben and Russell and Perry's who were in the conversation in the chat. And Tim as well. Thank you guys for joining in the conversation. It always makes it more robust to have more voices. So thank you so much for sharing yours today. And Alan, a huge thank you to you for sharing your voice today. I am super excited for more people to stay in the values in marketing conversation. So don't let this be the last values and marketing conversation you're in. You know we're going to bring it back on the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, because we've now spent 3 hours talking about values and there's still more to uncover. So it'll be back at some point. When, I don't know, but at some point it'll be back. And stay in the conversation. If values and how that drives what you're doing from a marketing perspective or any other business perspective is something that is top of mind for you today, stay in the conversation. Connect with me, connect with Alan, connect with each other from the chat, connect with other people who registered for this live, and have the conversation, because every single person has their own experiences that can give you a better framework of what you might want to try. With that, we're going to end the show for today. Thank you again, Alan, so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And until next time, permission to do.